This is work, full-time and on a family scale, with everybody pitching in. It's a story that looks as though it could go on forever. This way of life may vanish within a very few years, but if it goes, it won't have been without a fight. We'll find out why today as Discovery returns to Hawaii, our 50th state.
Discovery 69, the award-winning program for young people with Bill Owen and Virginia Gibson.
Hi, welcome to Discovery. There's a way of life right here that's a little bit different from life in any other part of the United States. That life is dependent on a crop, a cash agricultural crop that isn't grown anywhere else in our country but right here. This is coffee.
When it's like this, still on the tree, these little red globes are called coffee cherries. In fact, their growth pattern is pretty similar to that of real cherries. Their trees have white blossoms which bloom before the fruit appears. And coffee is technically a fruit, or at least it's closer to a fruit than it is to anything else. The fruit, when it's still unripe, is a light green, like little apples. When it's ripe, it's a rich red, and you could mistake it for a cherry. But unlike cherries, coffee is very difficult to grow. Hawaii, because of its unusual climate and soil, is the only place in the United States where coffee is grown commercially. And then it's only grown along a 21-mile stretch on the dry side of the largest island of the Hawaiian chain, the island of Hawaii. The coffee produced here is called Kona coffee because it's grown along the coast of the geographical district of Kona. The area which produces Kona coffee is a small, compact region. There are really only the mountains and the slopes to the sea. The farmers are either mauka on the mountainside or makai toward the sea. In between there's a road, and on the road 3 small towns which bleed into one another without very noticeable borders. They are Kainaliu, Kealakekua, and Captain Cook. Just a few miles from this supermarket is the monument commemorating the death of Captain Cook, the famous British explorer. He was killed in 1779 during a fight with Hawaiian natives, a little more than a year after he first discovered the Hawaiian chain of islands. The coffee growing activity is concentrated along these few miles of lava-filled mountains and coastline. The farms are generally small, and the families who work them have been here for generations.
The growing and harvesting of this one crop, coffee, has been the rock on which the lives of many families along Hawaii's Kona coast have been built. One such family is this one, Hansa Miyata and his wife and his children.
Hansa Miyata's parents came from Japan 70 years ago. He himself was born in Honolulu, just 1 mile from this spot, this 13-acre farm which has been his home since 1930. Hansa's mother is 88. His wife, Yaiko, comes from a family that has been in Hawaii 5 years longer than the Miyatas. Altogether, there are 7 sons and daughters. The younger ones all work alongside their father and their mother, particularly when it's time to pick the coffee cherries. Coffee on the Kona coast has always been very much a family operation, and a farmer without a fairly big family is in trouble. For when 4 or 6 harvests come around every year, everybody is needed. Susan is 17 and a student at Konawaena High School. Jean is 13. Clytie is 12. Gail is 11. Bruce is 8. He's the only boy in a family of 7 children. As the sole male member of the next Miyata generation, special attention falls on him. This would be true anywhere, but perhaps even more strongly in a family with Japanese attitudes and traditions. He will inherit these 13 acres. He'll also inherit the way of life and the work that goes with the land.
Once the coffee cherries are picked, most of the local farmers put them into bags and place the bags on the side of the road on special stands, where the collecting truck from the milling co-op will come by and pick them up. It works sort of like a milk collection route in Wisconsin.
But that isn't the way Hansa Miyata works. The coffee produced right here by Hansa and his family is taken one step further. The Miyatas turn out parchment coffee, and this is how it gets that way. The coffee cherry consists of an outer skin, a fleshy pulp, and 2 seeds. The coffee trade and the general public call them coffee beans, but they aren't beans, they're seeds. The seeds are flat on one side, and the pears grow with the flat sides facing each other. Each seed has 2 layers of protective matter. The inner layer is very thin and papery. It's called silver skin. Outside this skin, there's a tough parchment-like layer. And for this reason, the coffee, after the cherry skin and the pulp have been removed, is called parchment coffee. The Miyata family pulps their coffee here at home. And by taking this one step beyond merely picking it and bagging it, they bring a higher price for the coffee they grow.
The pulping process, the removal of the outer skin, the cherry skin, and its pulp, starts here. The coffee cherries are fed into the pulping machine along with water. An enclosed conveyor with a series of small buckets inside carries them upstairs to the pulper itself. The seeds drop into a container where they are soaked in brine overnight. Then the seeds are spread out, sun-dried for several days, and transferred to a forced air dryer to complete the process. The coffee is now called parchment coffee, still bearing its 2 internal skins. For the work of turning cherry coffee into parchment coffee, Hansa Miyata receives about $1.50 more for each bag of coffee he delivers to the mill.
It's here at the mill that those 2 inner skins will be removed by machinery, turning the product into what dealers call green coffee, dry, unroasted coffee. The Sunset Coffee Milling Company is an organization which supplies chemicals and fertilizers to the coffee growers and then receives their produce, refining, packaging, distributing, and marketing it.
Here on a larger scale, the Sunset Mill does what the Miyatas do at home, and then takes the coffee one step further, turning it into a marketable product. The mill is able to handle cherry coffee or parchment coffee. and it's up to the individual grower to determine whether he wants to take the extra time and effort to make the parchment coffee, and the additional $1.50 per bag that goes with it.
Is it worth it? It's probably rather marginal. Some people say it's more trouble than it's worth. Obviously, Hansa and his family feel it's worth the work and worth the time, at least for now. Each year, the profit is slimmer, and each year more coffee growers turn to other crops or take jobs in business and industry. There's a very small, very personal industry here, and it's in some trouble.
This is, or was, the Kamigaki Coffee Mill. Until a few years ago, it was an operating, if not exactly thriving, mill. Then in March of 1962, the mill closed, probably forever. What are the reasons? Overall, what caused it is a three-pronged problem which confronts most small industry. Rising costs, a shortage of cheap labor, and lower prices for the finished product. This is just a failed mill, a small business that didn't make it in a competitive world. But it's indicative of the dangers which hover over the mountains and the slopes of the Kona coast, and over the lives of men like Hansa Miyata.
He's engaged in a declining industry. There's a grave question if there will be a Kona coffee industry when Bruce Miyata is ready to inherit his father's land. Hansa Miyata is fighting a war simply to remain what he is, a coffee grower. The outcome is still in doubt. In the meantime, is there anyone helping him and men like him? We'll find out in just a minute.
This is the University of Hawaii's Cooperative Extension Service at Kainaliu, one of those three little highway towns between the mountains and the sea. It's about a mile from Hansa Miyata's farm. And if Hansa has a problem, he can come here and check it out with the men of the university's College of Tropical Agriculture.
Extension Supervisor John Iwani is holding one of the things university engineers developed in order to help farmers hang on a little longer, make a better profit out of their time and work, and, in short, remain farmers. It's called a coffee shaker, and it can be an adaptation of a car polisher, a weld saw, or an electric drill. In this case, the gadget started life as an electric chainsaw. Any hand-carryable machine will do, with the head removed and a clamp put in its place. A good coffee shaker should weigh between 8 and 15 pounds, so that it can be easily carried. It runs off a portable generator. The way the coffee shaker works in the fields is very simple. The clamp is attached to the vertical members of the tree's branches. The machine shakes the branch and at the same time shakes loose the riper coffee cherries from the tree. It works. However, in doing so, the shaker creates another problem. Green, unripe cherries are bound to come off with the red, ripe ones, no matter how good a shaker is developed. Sorting them is another chore which can eat up man-hours and eventually reduce the profit margin for the grower. Here again, the University of Hawaii's engineers came up with something. This is called a separator. It's based on the theory that the unripe coffee cherries, like little green apples, are harder and when dropped from a height will bounce farther than the softer, ripe ones. To a point, it works. At the moment, there's only one of these separators in existence. There are 12 shakers still in the experimental stage. Which is best is still to be determined. Hansa goes home with a coffee shaker. He'll try it and come back to Mr. Iwani and report on it. This way, in this collaboration of theory, experiment, and application, the best possible mechanical aid will one day be arrived at. Will it be enough to make a great difference? Maybe, and maybe not. One of the university's engineers says, "I'm afraid we started 10 years too late." Maybe it's true, and maybe it isn't. But Hansa Miyata is too heavily occupied with the business of working to think much about theory. Meantime, everyone works, everyone helps.
Two women of the Miyata family work here in the Kona Inn in the town of Kailua. There was a time when women of Japanese background did not work in public. But that time is past, partly as a cultural change and partly as a concession to the altering structure of the coffee growers' lives. Judith is in the reservation office. Her mother, Yaiko, is a pantry assistant in the hotel kitchen. Meanwhile, through cooperation, understanding, and hard work, the life of the family moves on. It's hard to tell what will happen in the future. Hansa speaks of 40 years on these same 13 acres. Should Bruce grow up wanting to be a coffee grower, it may be impossible. What are the alternatives in his future? We'll find out in just a minute.
If coffee growers like Hansa Miyata are to survive, there are basically two paths to follow. They must alter the entire pattern and structure of their lives, or they must change their traditional way of farming. This man, Yash Taguchi, chose the first path. He is, like Hansa, the son of a full-time Kona coffee grower. And like Hansa, he still has the land, but now it's just a hobby, something to do on weekends. His real work is here.
When Yash Taguchi gave up coffee growing, he became a local sales representative for a commercial manufacturer. Now he runs Kona Krafts, a rehabilitation center for vocational training of handicapped students and older people. Now, the closest his work brings him to coffee is the Kona coffee wood, from which the trainees make bookends and walking sticks. Yash Taguchi is a product of the Kona Coast coffee fields, but he has stepped aside, stepped away from the economic struggle of growing coffee. But coffee has left its mark on surprising corners of the area, including the schools. Yash's boy Stanton is 6. He goes to the same school that Bruce Miyata does. The schools out here used to be run according to the seasonal growth of the coffee crop. They used to be on what everybody called coffee schedule. That meant that youngsters had their summer vacations, so-called, in the period between November and late January, in order to be out of school and able to work in the harvest when they were needed. And they were needed. Starting next season, there'll be 4 school terms, and parents can apply to have their children out during whichever one they desire. Growers with a late harvest can have their children out later in the school year. It's a variation on the old plan, and yet one more way in which the public community is trying to keep the Kona coffee growers in business a little longer.
There's another way the coffee growers and the men who process and market their produce have developed to help in the overall picture.
They're changing their operation so that they can grow and handle another product which may contain the major part of the solution for the coffee men's problems. These are macadamia nut trees. Macadamias were brought here from Australia almost 100 years ago as ornamental trees. And then someone discovered that they produced excellent and unusual nuts. Coffee farmers, if they want to stay farmers at all, will, of necessity, switch to macadamia, now or in the near future.
This tree is just 1 year old. It won't bear a crop until it's 5, and it won't really be mature until it's 7 or 8. Coffee, on the other hand, will bear a crop after just 2 years. Hansa Miyata is in the process of converting 11 of his 13 acres to macadamia.
During that process of conversion, there'll be a lot of work. But then Mr. Miyata and his family have always worked, always. And they'll have a future, but it won't come without sacrifice, compromise, and change. Most of all, change. We'll be back in just a minute.
We hope you've enjoyed our return visit to Hawaii, our 50th state.
If you'd like to find out more about Hawaii's Kona coast, then ask your librarian for any of these books. Hawaii, USA by Ruth Edelman, Hawaii Nay by Ruth M. Tabra, and this book, Hawaii, Our 50th State by Charles A. Borden.
Be with us next week for another exciting discovery. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Discovery Unit's transportation and promotional consideration provided by United Airlines. This has been a Jules Power production in association with ABC News.